Hey guys, I have another very interesting guest, John Wood, who's the CEO of US Wellness Meats. Okay, basically it's an online site that you can actually buy grass-fed animal products. He has a lot of other products, and the reason I wanted to talk to him is because I wanted to do a video on grass-fed foods, and the problem is that it's hard to find some experts. I wanted to go right to the source, find like the expert of this topic who actually is a farmer that's been doing this for a long time. So thanks, John, for being here. And I just want to welcome you. I appreciate you spending the time. I know you're extremely busy with your farms.
Dr. Berg, I appreciate the invitation, and I also appreciate your knowledge on grass-fed meats and what you've done for the industry. You're a great asset to our community because you understand the value of smart nutrition and understand if we go back in the planet, for a million years, all of our ancestors ate grass-fed meats, and 1900, only 2% of us were diabetic, and cancer and heart disease weren't even discussed by modern medicine at that time point. So it gives you just a little bit of a clue. I think our ancestors had this pretty well figured out.
Totally. So the first question I wanted to know, just from your viewpoint, and I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and you can just kind of, just give me the summarized version. I know there's a lot more to it, but the difference between grass-fed and grain-fed, just kind of tell us like the basic differences. And I know all of the factory, actually all the factory farming with the cattle is grain-fed, but I think they are switching over to grass-fed, but that's a whole different conversation. So just kind of give us the essence of grass-fed versus grain-fed. What's some basic information people need to know about that?
The most basic, simple point I want to make is that the grazing animal is consuming a forage diet, plant-based diet, and the pH and the fermentation vat. The grazing animals, whether it be the bison, be the lamb, be the dairy cow, be the beef cow, these animals, all four of these animal groups have a four-chambered stomach, and we have a simple stomach in humans and pigs and chickens. But in the first four animals mentioned, the fermentation vat is the first step in the process. And when you're fermenting forages, you have a pH of 7. And that creates this wonderful 2-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. It creates, CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which fights cancer, diabetes, puts on lean muscle, and good for the circulatory system. On the other hand, when you take the same group of animals and you introduce them to grains and put them on a starch-based diet, the pH goes from pH 7 down to 4.5 or 5, and then you completely change the suite of fatty acids because those families change completely. And so the omega-6-3 ratio goes up to 20 bad guys and 1 good guy, omega-6. The CLA levels fall apart, and you have a product that's just not near as healthy. And I don't think we realized what we were doing in the 1960s when this change was being made. But in a very short, simple statement, the fats in the grazing animal are very, very healthy, and the fatty acids in the grain-fed animal are not near as healthy. And I think of why the human population has decreased in health in the last 30 years.
Wow. Not to mention the grains are mostly GMO, and that's a whole other topic. As far as, tell me about, you see a lot of times you have grass-fed or you have grain finished. Explain that.
Well, that's a sad story because basically all animals are on mama's milk and grass until they weigh 600 pounds. And then the next 600, 800 pounds of gain on the animal, is either like grazing operations to do it correctly, keep them on grazing all the way to the last day of their lives. A few people think that you have to feed them 30 days of grain at the tail end of the grazing period to get the good flavor, good taste. What they don't realize is that they simply annihilate the CLA levels, the good omega-3 levels, the bad omega-6 levels fall right back in. 30 days of grain will ruin 200 days of sunlight and grazing animals.
Wow.
And what I've learned from Mark Schatzker, who wrote the book called Steak, a New York Times bestseller about 6 or 7 years ago, it's the intermuscular fat is what makes the flavor, makes the wow flavor. And that's not the seam fat in a ribeye. It's the intermuscular fat, and it's coming, and it's called. He calls it a photolipid. That's the term I picked up from Mark Schatzker. And the photolipids is where the really wow flavor comes from. I go to a nice restaurant, and if the grain fed's the only choice, I'll be asked by the waiter, "How was your steak?" I said, "Well, it was tender, but it was really bland in flavor." And the really unique flavor comes from the properly raised grass-fed animal. It's been on a really high nutrition diet of good grasses. So that's the short answer.
Oh, wow, interesting. Now, there's one thing that's very unique about your farms, and by the way, anyone watching, I'm not an affiliate, I'm not getting any kickbacks for his products, just FYI. But I want to I like his products, and I wanted to promote the farmer because that's kind of a high quality. I know it takes a tremendous amount of work, and I appreciate you doing this and other farmers doing this. But I wanted to talk about the unique thing about your soils. You guys have some, like, you don't just feed your cattle and animals on any grass. Like you really put a lot of attention on the soils. You mentioned that in one of your blogs. Can you tell us a little bit about the soil or the vegetation that is growing, that's feeding these animals?
Well, there's far more life in the soil below the surface than above the surface, and I've become very intrigued with the ability to create really healthy soil. There's a tablespoon of soil has got like 1 billion microbes in it. People don't really understand that. And we were trying to store carbon. In fact, grazing lands around the world, if you go back to Africa 1 million years ago, there was no deserts in Africa. It was all grazing lands from Cape Horn to the Mediterranean, and the large herds of grazing herbivores were on that planet, and they were managed by the predators that lived there as well. And so they grazed in a group and moved in a group, and the predators would eat the stragglers, the old and the wounded, or whatever. But that's what we're trying to mimic in North America today, is by managing these animals. They spend, if you can imagine, the floor in the room you're standing in now, broken up into 30 different cells, and each day they move to a different paddock. Well, after 30 days, you've got a really nice growth of grass, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give the plants a chance to rest. And every time, these plants have healthier root systems, they're pulling more carbon out of the soil. And when you have a really healthy, vibrant soil, you produce healthier, more vibrant animals. You produce more minerals in the beef, and the flavor goes up. Gabe Brown is kind of the guru in the state of North Dakota, who's led this revolution. Several other friends around the country have really perfected it. But we recently, in late August, early September, northeast Missouri, my landscape received 12 inches of rain in about 10 days. I've got 3 rather large lakes on my property, and they barely showed much gain in water level. My neighbors had water running over roads, and quite a runoff. And I was able to capture and hold almost all of that water, which was amazing. It wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. And because the soil is just like a sponge, when it's healthy, it absorbs water, absorbs nutrients. And we call it biodiversity. We're growing, instead of a single monoculture, we're growing 10 and 12 cover crop mixes, summer annual plants that these animals just have a smorgasbord. They've got numerous things to pick from, and these animals are very astute. They'll pick the top of the plants. We actually like to graze 30 or 40% of the available forage, and the hoof action will put the rest of it on the soil surface so the microbes can feed. It's a really hard thing to get through your head that you're only going to harvest 30 or 40% of the top of the plants, but that's where the energy is. And the rest of the plant goes to the soil surface to feed the microbes. But once you understand that principle, you're really getting into the new term of biodynamic farming. And then you require no fertility. Mother Nature does all the work. That's what was, if you look back 1 million years ago, there was no fertilizer plants. There was nothing being done by Mother Nature, and that's what we're trying to mimic.
Fascinating. Now, I've a hard time finding certain questions or finding certain answers when I do research on this topic. Maybe you can help me figure this out. But like the typical commercial factory farming, especially with cattle, or let's just say chickens. You see studies that show that they're high in arsenic, they're high in Prozac, not high, but they have Prozac in their feathers. There's all these medications, histamines. And so basically it sounds to me, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but they're, even to grow these animals, they have to, fill them up with things, antibiotics. They get bigger, but then that might make them tired, so they have to give them caffeine, and then that keeps the problem. So they have to give them downers. I mean, like, is that what's happening in the commercial farming industry? It's just completely out of control with drugs and things to stimulate, inhibit their growth.
Well, I'm not a chicken producer, but the chicken industry has been vertically integrated now for probably the last 25 years. They produce massive quantities of poultry on the market very inexpensively. But these chickens, if you can imagine a metal cage, there's room for maybe one bird to stand or two birds to stand, maybe a room for two to lay down and two have to stand. And so that's a pretty confined environment, even though they're only in that situation for 6 weeks. And I'm not sure they're given mood-altering drugs, but arsenic was something they used to put in chicken feed. That was done, and I forget the reason, but that was very low levels of that. But the free-range chicken producers, which we're working with, we have a family, and it's a co-op in northern Arkansas, central Arkansas, which is doing this correctly. They move these birds twice a day on fresh pasture. And these chickens are really astute. They will, they will pick up lots of things from the land. They eat the crickets and the earthworms, and they're getting a lot of nutrients they would normally get through a diet. And so they're non-GMO. It's a non-GMO diet, a little bit of corn. However, their protein needs, they get some non-GMO soybean meal. We actually have one producer using field peas, which we do have a soy-free option now. But they generate about 30 to 40% of their diet off the land. Chickens are pretty resourceful, but their stomachs are the size of a thimble, and so it requires a little bit of concentrated energy to get them to grow at the proper rates. But there are no mood-altering drugs. These chickens, and you can tell chickens on stress levels. If they're stressed, they'll start losing feathers, and these birds look really, really clean when I've gone to look at them. So they actually, both farms we're utilizing are using, they call them chicken tractors. These are movable pens that are 6 feet tall. The water's there. They move into a fresh patch of grass twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. And granted, chickens are fair game to predators and coyotes and roving dogs, so you've got to keep them away from the predator populations. Is why you got to have them in a confined setting. Some egg layers will put up a large outer perimeter fence, and the chickens can roam by day, and then they shut them up at night into a chicken house to keep the wily opossums and raccoons away from them. But chickens are a very interesting animal. They are the most efficient converter of feed into muscle fiber on the planet.
Interesting. I was at the grocery store yesterday, and I saw they're doing a sale on chickens. It was like $3.99 for a whole chicken. That was fully cooked. I mean, how could the grocery stores actually make a profit? That the cost to feed and the production is so low. I mean, it's just, the quality is just zero.
When you said it's a cooked chicken, that also makes me suspicious that there's a story behind that bird. In order to sell it, they had to cook it to, get it into a clean label state, so to speak. And who knows, it might be a loss leader. There may be other items in that meat counter that are going to make their money. But when I see a cooked chicken like that, it makes me a little suspicious that there's, a fresh chicken can only stay on the counter so long, and then they have to cook it. So I'm always leery of a fully cooked chicken.
Interesting. I didn't think of that. There's one point I want to bring up about even your company. It doesn't have a label of organic. So tell us why that is. And I know actually in your state, I think it's, they pretty much, you have to label it. The certification of organic basically charges you 3% of the gross profits. And I mean, just clarify that for me.
Well, 2005, the state of Missouri, the legislature, unbeknownst to me or why they did this, they actually used to have a state office for organic certification. It was a really simple thing, didn't cost much money. Missouri had a lot of certified organic producers, anywhere from chickens to apples to, to wine or whatever, and they elected to take $120,000 out of the budget and turn it over to private industry. And there was a company in St. Louis that picked it up, and I approached them in the fall of 2005, and they, the farm I had really been out of row crop production for about 7 years, and then I knew it would pass. And I asked the lady, I said, how do we renew this? And she says, well, we're going to look at your financial records, and we'll take 3% of the previous year's gross sales in order to maintain the license. And I said, gross sales, not net sales? And she said, yes, your gross sales. And I just thought it was insane. It was going to cost dramatically more than what the state, the state you just paid an annual permit, just like a license fee. And so, we've elected to use, apple cider vinegar that's out to these animals year round for parasite control. It does a pretty good job on external parasites as well. That's kind of a trick I picked up 10 or 12 years ago. And so, we've never used hormones. Anything with an antibiotic gets corralled and goes to the standard auction. And these animals don't really hardly ever get sick. The diet they're on, the land they live on, and the health of the soil, we rarely ever see a sick animal. And the apple cider vinegar is kind of our ace in the hole for that. And we're not buying prepared fertilizers. We let the soil microbes do it. So we're pretty much an organic product right now. But then when you certify organic, you've got a paper trail you got to maintain. That's more staff, and then the harvesting plant's got to keep track of it. They charge more money, and then there's just a whole series of costs that roll into that thing, and it ends up the consumer is going to spend more money. And I kind of agree with Joel Salatin, what I call the prairie populace of the grass-fed movement. Grass-fed is beyond organic, because 99% of all the organic beef sold in America today has been grain-fed organic corn, and organic corn will give you the same omega-6 levels as non-organic corn. So I've always said grass-fed is beyond organic, and to me that's the real separation right there.
Interesting. As far as where this is going, I think even the factory farms are going towards grass-fed, but they're going to do it in pellets or something, or.
Well, we're not feeding grass-fed pellets. I mean, that's I know there's some of that going on, but you can buy alfalfa pellets, I guess, which would be a form of grass. But we actually have a large number of animals right on the Gulf Coast year-round now, in the southern tip of Alabama, which is kind of it's protected by Mobile Bay and the Gulf, and we can actually do year-round grazing in the far deep south, and that's where our winter production takes place. So it's very expensive to feed animals stored hay and stored baleage in the winter months. It's just difficult to do when the air gets really cold. It takes a lot of energy for them to maintain body heat. So we try to have most of our animals along the Gulf Coast in the winter during the winter time frame.
Interesting. And another thing that I noticed, and I purchased some of your hamburger with, was it like 55%, right? I think it was 45% fat. Incredible.
Yeah, in fact, that's Ben Greenfield is kind of a famous Spartan racer in the United States and a great fan of the grass-fed industry. And he encouraged us to do that, I guess, in April of 2017. And he got behind it and promoted it. And I think by the end of the year last year, that was the number 13 selling item in the entire web store. I would have never believed how it took off. But we not only have you are correct, it's 55% lean to 45% fat, which, by the way, is the exact same ratio of our pemmican bars, which is we've had around now for 15, 16 years. And pemmican is my breakfast fuel, so to speak. And it's also 55% beef jerky and 45% straight beef tallow, which is about 230 calories and about 12 grams of protein in a 2.14 ounce serving, which is probably one of the most intense foods you can take. And we actually have a sailor, Istvan Kopar, who is in the Great Global Race going around the world, 30,000 miles of transit from the coast of France, and left there in July, coming back hopefully in March of this year. Of the 18 sailboats that took off, there's only 7 or 8 left in competition, and this man has got 360 pounds of pemmican in the hold of his ship. He's quite excited by his Explorer diet, but that's another interesting story on pemmican. But that's, the ketogenic movement is real and alive, and I think people start eating that, and I just keep hearing stories about I started eating keto and I lost 20 pounds, 30 pounds. I talked to someone a couple of weeks ago, lost 100 pounds in the last year by changing their diet.
Yeah, it's happening. It's a really amazing thing, and you want something that's higher in fat and protein. You don't want lean. Like I bought some one time. I by mistake I bought some hamburger from the grocery store. It was 90% lean, 10% fat. I couldn't even eat it. It was just too dried out, too disgusting. But you're a high fatty hamburger, and I also like you have a version that has some organ meats mixed in there. I really like that as well, and also your liverwurst. So because to find a grass-fed, high-quality product, organ meats, which actually has more nutrients than even vegetables, iron, vitamin A, the B vitamins, I mean, incredible. It's just very sustaining. So I'm glad that you have that.
Well, thank you. The organ meats, it's just amazing how many organ meats we've sold over the last 18 years. But when you add the organs to your diet, just neat things happen, and that's been the really fun part of this business. And liverwurst, believe it or not, out of the 390 products we sell, it ranks third or fourth. It kind of flips between 3 and 4 for the revenue generator. It's just stunning how much liverwurst we sell, and it's 15% kidney, 15% heart, and 20% liver. And if you talk to any old-time medical doctors, they would always say eat your liver and eat your hearts. I mean, those organ meats have a lot of enzymes, and you understand as well as anybody about the importance of that. And just amazing how many people I've talked to in the last 15 or 16 years that have raved about those organ meats. And those recipes actually go back about 100 years. A gentleman that helped us create those back in the first 3 or 4 years of business. That was his grandfather's 3x4 card, which is kind of an interesting story. But and then if you go back to Dr. Weston Price, when he traveled the world back in the pre-World War II or World War II era, he found that the Aborigines in Australia had the lowest number of cavities, or caries, I guess is a proper dental term, of any population on the planet. And the unique feature about the Aborigines, they had the highest consumption of organ meats of anybody in these travels. And he'd gone to America, gone to Europe, gone to Africa, gone into Australia. So the more organ meats you consume, the better your odds are beating the longevity game.
Absolutely. Well, I know that you're probably extremely busy. It was hard to nail you down to do this interview, but I just appreciate the increased awareness on some of these points that people might not be aware of. So thank you, John. I appreciate it. I'm going to put a link, guys, down below to his website. Check it out. It's awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Dr. Berg, thank you. It's been great.
So I want to know about what you think about this video. So please comment below and tell me what you think.